The process of applied functional science is the transformation of the notion into the motion.
You're listening to the Gray Institute podcast, a production of Gray Institute.
Move your body, come on, move your body.
Warm welcome to our Gray Institute podcast. Today we have the pleasure of having Dr. David Tiberio with us to talk about the whole concept of chain reaction. Welcome, David T.
Well, thank you, Gary. And it's going to be a lot of fun talking about one of the critical principles of applied functional science. And so let me start by saying you have taught a seminar for over 25 years called Chain Reaction. And so maybe you could begin to discuss what that means to you in terms of how the body moves and functions.
As you know, literally 28 years ago, we put together this course called Chain Reaction, but it was a result really of the course that you and I put together years and years and years ago, and we're showing our age here, called When the Feet Hit the Ground, Everything Changes. And we realized coming out of school that understanding human movement was really important. And you and I didn't have a clue on what the foot did, but we did know that when the foot moved, the knee moved, and then the hip moved, and the rest of the body moved. And so that was a huge fascination for both of us. And we both, of course, knew the term kinetic chain, but it seemed to be more powerful than that, that there was a reaction that occurred, that if my hand moved, everything else in my body moved, and if my foot moved, everything else in my body moved. And so we kind of came up with this whole idea that we need to understand and take advantage of what we call the chain reaction. Now, in your opportunity to teach for years and years and years, and of course now teaching and being the dean of our GIFT program, when you hear the word chain reaction, just kind of intuitively, what comes to your mind?
Well, through the many years that we've spent together, I really see it as meaning the connectedness of the body. And when you understand how all the parts are together, there are significant ramifications of appreciating that fact, because it changes the way we do everything, the way we evaluate, the way we treat. And another word that comes to mind is integrated, that the parts of the body aren't separate, they're integrated. And so we have to appreciate that although we might use techniques to examine a particular joint or muscle in isolation, that we would rarely choose to do that out of our desire to see how the body works together. That integrated nature forces us to think about how one part of the body influences another.
Now, I know, again, for years, you as a professor of physical therapy, you taught basically how to rehab patients, but it seemed the model that you taught, and certainly the model that I learned, and even talking with a lot of the students coming out of school now, that we're still being taught in what we would call an isolationist theory. There seems to be a chapter on the foot, and then a chapter on the knee, and a chapter on hip. Why do you think that, again, you taught it, and why do you think we were taught it? But I guess more perplexing, why is it still being taught that way?
Well, part of it is that you have a gift of seeing how the body is connected, and many of us do not. Now, that's not a criticism of the rest of us, because we can all appreciate how the body's connected. But if we weren't taught that way, we have a value for how we were educated, and therefore there's in certain circles a resistance to seeing the body as an integrated structure, seeing the body as a system, seeing the body as a chain reaction organism. Now, as we look at that, we begin to appreciate that you cannot understand what a joint is going to do in 3D space, and you can't really understand how a muscle is going to react during a functional global movement unless we look at it doing a functional total body global movement. When we utilize techniques such as the 3D MAPS program, in order to see how someone moves, see how they move well, but also see where maybe they don't move quite as well. We begin to open up our appreciation that although we're seeing something that may not be optimal, we recognize that one part of the body may be creating the negative influence on another that may actually suffer from some symptoms.
That's, as you kind of think about it, you said a phrase that there's a resistance for people to appreciate the body as a chain reaction. And I guess I kind of start nodding my head and say, how can there be a resistance when it's so obvious? When you walk, one joint doesn't just move and then another joint move. And when we watch TV and we watch the athleticism, it's obvious that everything is a chain reaction, and at no time during any activity that's at least fun, is there just a joint moving. So why do you think there was a resistance, but even now, why is that resistance still there when it's as obvious as just observing moving and knowing that there's a chain reaction? We all right now could stand up and just take our left hand and rotate it way, way, way around to the left, and all of a sudden we look and we realize that our right foot literally went through a motion because of a chain reaction. My right foot didn't say I'm going to move. It reacted to the chain reaction of the hand to the shoulder, to the trunk, to the hips, to the knees, to the foot. So why would you even describe it as a resistance?
Well, that's a good question that I'm not sure I can answer fully, but I believe that on some level, seeing that the whole body's connected can create a little anxiety in any type of movement practitioners, because it seems that the complexity of the body would make it very difficult to see how one part of the body is influencing another part. But to be honest, you, and I've had the fortune of working with you along with your sons and other people, have worked through the complexity of this and have gotten to the simple side of complexity. And so it's really not that difficult once we understand the principles or the truths of human movement, because those principles, one of which is chain reaction, lead to the strategies that then lead to understanding why we would or would not choose to employ a particular technique. But it's that initial sense that the body's so complex, I'm having a hard enough time understanding what happens inside the knee. How am I ever going to understand how the big toe affects the right shoulder? And so it's the initial, I think part of it is, it's the initial anxiety that's created when we're faced with the challenge of understanding how the entire body works together.
Yeah, I think you're onto something there, because again, when I've talked with other people and other professors and other people who teach and say, well, why are we stuck on trying to, for example, describe the foot in the air as an isolated entity when the entire function of the foot is to serve the body and to let the rest of the body be successful? And the answer is, well, the foot's really complex as soon as you put it on the ground. And then if you put it on the ground and you say it's going to influence the knee, which it does, which then influences the hip, which it does, which influences that chain reaction again, it seems like there's a complexity, and therefore we would choose to teach our students the simplicity. I think where we get into trouble is we assume the simplicity is functional. We assume the simplicity is valid. We assume the simplicity is right. And of course, over our 42 years of doing this now, we realize that the simplicity has misled us, that the foot does not function isolated by itself in a way that's even near what it really does when it interacts as a chain reaction with the rest of the body, interacts with ground and ground reaction force. And of course, we can go to any joint in the body right now and say the exact same thing. So the theoretical, well, if we learn the simple first, then we can learn the complex, really doesn't hold water, because the simple is, again, not revealing what we need to know about the body, about evaluating the body, about treating the body, about getting the body to perform better. So I've always had this sense that this simple approach, and it, again, is simple, is not only simple, but it's simple-minded. It's not taking into consideration what's going on. I think we could actually do an isolated approach, but while it's integrated. So if I said, well, we're going to study the knee today, but in order to study the knee, we're going to have to see what influence the foot has on it in, let's say, walking, and what influence the hip has on it, and probably more importantly, what influence the knee has on the foot and what influence the knee has on the hip. So the whole idea of chain reaction, on one hand, is complex, but it's necessary. It's actually, as you said, if we just give it a little time, it can be simple, and it can simply lead us to the truth that we really need. So there seems to be a big difference between simple and complex, and being on the right side of that complexity and not making it what we might call stupid simple.
I couldn't agree more. I think, again, that once people are exposed to how what appears to be complex can be simple, and if they allow themselves to recognize that their training may not have been complete, it may not have been sufficient to understand how the human body works, then they'll begin to search for what is a little bit closer to the truth, how the body really works. And then once you do that, at least in my experience, I was able to see the value of taking a chain reaction approach to everything that we do. And one of the biggest points that I think becomes obvious to people when they hear it is that the place where a client may be having symptoms or a person working out starts to develop discomfort, that place that we might say is recognized as the source of their complaint is in almost every case not the source of the problem or the cause of the problem. And if you look at it from that perspective, you can treat someone's symptoms, but if you know there's a cause out there that you haven't treated, you are lost without embracing the chain reaction approach. And as soon as you embrace chain reaction and the principle or truth of chain reaction and how we move, then the other areas that are creating the issue or the problem or the abnormal stress or not providing enough motion or creating or allowing too much motion, those other areas become much more obvious, and that empowers us. The chain reaction principle empowers us as movement practitioners to go well beyond what we've been taught. And that's why I think it's so critical that everyone gets to learn about the chain reaction principle.
As you heard the story before, Dave, but I think it's a fun story to tell. Simply because I think it was the driver for us together to learn the chain reaction was the understanding that I had the privilege of working in a small community, and I know as a therapist I was able to treat symptoms. We had some neat modalities, we had some soft tissue techniques that we utilized, and we used rest, and we used electricity, and we used sound, and we used TENS, and we used all kinds of things, and using what we call an evidence-based approach. We followed the evidence, and sure enough, within a short period of time, the patient was happy because their symptoms were gone. They left, I discharged them, they were fully functional. Yet I would run into them, let's say at the mall, many times a couple months later, and that little thing would be back. Their low back pain would be back, their knee pain would be back, the tendonitis in their Achilles would be back, their shoulder now has that click in it. And I would scratch my head and say, am I missing something here? And we realized we were missing everything. It was pretty easy to follow what we'd call the evidence-based protocols to get rid of the symptom. But when you then say, but we forgot to ask ourselves a simple question, what caused the low back pain? And as we understand the biomechanics of the low back, and we actually talk to the low back would say, I don't just irritate myself just to irritate myself. There's something going on in the chain reaction of the body that's causing this. So when you do the thing you like to do, you function in the thing you need to do. The chain reaction of the body, because of something at the shoulder or the thoracic spine or the hip or down at the foot or anywhere in the body, is causing an abnormal stress on me, the low back would say. And therefore, yes, you can quiet me down and treat my symptom, but if you don't do what you just said, Dave, try to look for the actual cause and treat the cause concurrently, then again, we would say you missed everything. And we know that because I personally missed everything. and was, I think, motivated to say, I'd like to go to the mall someday where I saw a patient that I treated a year ago and still have them feeling good. When we know the studies are there. The studies say that, people with low back incidence, they go in for therapy, they get better, they follow these evidence-based protocols, and they're all what we would call hunky-dory, and they're all back to full function. And a year later, the statistics show up to 95% of these people have that same back pain. Well, what happened? Well, the cause that was never treated initially has come back, and we haven't identified the chain reaction cause of the dysfunction.
Absolutely. And as you were talking, I remembered that one of the things that when we talk about evidence-based is usually these reports are based on a subjective judgment that the person might write down, yeah, my pain is better, I feel better, etc. Whereas when we utilize the chain reaction principles to take advantage of total body movements driven by the hands or the feet or both, what we get to utilize is now let's test it, let's try to work on it, and let's retest it. We have this immediate feedback available to us that what we've done has made a difference or it hasn't. But as you say, at least we know right now that we're doing something that's going down the right path, or we don't, so we don't waste a lot of time. And so the proof of applied functional science and the proof of the chain reaction principles and the strategies and ultimately the techniques is we can retest immediately and see what difference we've made.
That's, for somebody like me who's getting old, I wish I would have had that years ago. Because so much of what I did is I said, I think I'm doing the right thing. I think I'm following this protocol or this process. I think I'm, but again, it was mostly subjective. Yeah, I think I feel better. Yeah, I think I can go back and run. Yeah, I think, but we didn't have an objective way to say, you know what? We're on the right path, or better yet, I don't think we're on the right path. You have that Achilles tendonitis. We took you through what we call a movement analysis, which we call our 3D map system. And I don't think I'm getting that good hip extension, and therefore, yeah, your Achilles feels better, but until we get the cause, until we get that hip moving better, you're really not going to be able to safely go out and run and not have to worry about that thing coming back. So to have an objective, quantifiable way to assess the chain reaction, not looking at joints in isolation, not just doing a range of motion to the shoulder, laying somebody down on their back and have them do a straight leg raise for the hip or wiggling the hip around, or doing just a simple single plane chain reaction truncal range of motion, or all the quote-unquote range of motion things that we've been taught over the years. We now know the wisdom lies in putting the body together, integrating it, and using some things that you just called, and I'd like you to expand upon that just a pinch, using the drivers of chain reaction as the authentic drivers to see what's going on. When you say the drivers of chain reaction, what do you mean by that?
Well, there are forces that exist outside in our world. The gravity, ground reaction force, mass, and momentum are certainly drivers of how we move. But more often, we think when we're designing movements, and as seen in the 3D maps analysis, as well as the performance system, we use body parts as drivers. We would use the hands and arms as a driver to create a motion, not just in the hands and the arms and the shoulders, but in the entire body. We would use the feet to do a lunge or a squat to create a chain reaction throughout the body. And obviously there are many occasions when we would utilize the pelvis. But we can use any body part as a driver. The magic of understanding and taking advantage of different drivers is I can create, and anyone who utilizes applied functional science creates different strategies. You previously mentioned that when you took your left hand and you rotated it to the left, something happened in your right foot. That's a chain reaction. That's a driver that's pretty far from your foot. We might call that a subtle driver because the motion being driven by the arm can be absorbed along the way, but it'll still create that chain reaction. You might, though, want to create a more powerful or direct driver to that foot by using the knee as a driver. You also mentioned the person with low back pain. Well, if in our analysis we found that the low back pain was at least being partially created by the thoracic spine, we would probably choose a driver that got to the thoracic spine before it got to the low back. But if we thought the hip was the problem, we wouldn't choose the arm as the driver of our chain reaction, because that chain reaction to get to the hip would have to go through the low back initially. Eventually we will, but when the person's first getting into utilizing this approach, they don't want us to go through their back. They would say, hey, can't you take advantage of a driver of the either leg or of a movement of the knee that will get to this hip, and I'll feel great and I'll feel success and I'll be able to give you what you want, but it won't hurt me because you won't be going through my back. And so that person's going to feel success. They're not going to feel pain. They're going to be encouraged. They're going to have faith in us. So utilizing the chain reaction and utilizing the different strategies that drivers give us really empowers us to create not only the physical reaction we want, but the behavioral reaction and connection that we have to create with our clients.
That's a pretty comprehensive review of drivers, and we'll get into that in some future podcasts. I think if we just kind of sit back and just think about the chain reaction, if I'm listening to this and I'm just kind of worried about myself, I want myself to be more flexible. I want myself to be a little stronger. I want to be able to do more things. I want to hit the golf ball better. I might want to play basketball better. I want to pick up my grandkids better. I think the takeaway for me is that I need to look at ways that I can train within the chain reaction, where my whole body moves when my hands and my feet move, and then my hands and feet move together. And again, we'll talk more about this later in all three planes of motion, and that I can take advantage of that. And so pure functional flexibility is driven through a chain reaction. Pure strength is driven through the chain reaction. And so I would say, wow, I'm looking forward to going on to grayinstitute.com and looking around at all the videos, especially the training videos, and find out, boy, how do we use a chain reaction to train? Now, if I'm a professional, a movement professional that has the responsibility of rehabbing people, of training people, of getting people bigger, stronger, faster, and just have the opportunity to try to allow people to enjoy life more, I certainly have to look at this chain reaction and go, wow, do I know that? And do I need to know that? I think it's undeniable that we need to know that. I don't even think that isn't up for debate because it's a truth. The truth is the body functions as a chain reaction. Our strategy is we must evaluate it and treat it as a chain reaction. Therefore, our techniques, for example, to maybe make your knee feel better, might be doing something through the hip, through the foot, and through the hand in order to get to the knee, not sitting down on the machine and isolating out the machine and causing an abnormal stress. So I think just understanding this concept of chain reaction and knowing that we've developed this 3D maps that takes advantage of the chain reaction, and all of our rehab and performance training exercises are based and are founded on chain reaction, allows me as that practitioner to go, well, there's a lot of resources to allow me to help a lot of people through the chain reaction. How would you want to summarize for our listeners, just relative to, I really want to make sure you get this out of this understanding of chain reaction? What would you leave them with, Dave?
Well, we're going to go deeper into it in subsequent podcasts. I think the one point is how much power it gives us as someone who gets to stand before a client. The client comes to us, they want help. We want to serve them. We have a servant's heart, and we would only hope that we wouldn't fail them. And the chain reaction principle really empowers us. It takes what we have to offer and multiplies its ability to help each individual who has a different problem, a different cause of the same problem, has different needs. We're not afraid of the uniqueness of the individual because of the power that chain reaction principle gives us.
I think that's a wonderful summary. Well, Dave, I really appreciate your time today, and we certainly appreciate those who are listening to this podcast. Again, the Gray Institute's pursuit of just encouraging transformation, in other words, understanding this applied functional science so we can create environments so lives can be transformed and people can really enjoy their bodies, enjoy the movement of their bodies, enjoy their life, and be able to, what we call perspire, kind of work out in order to inspire, help others and inspire other people with our ability to move and our ability to just be able to help others. So Dave, thanks for so many people that you've helped. Thanks for help on this podcast, and we'll look forward to our next podcast where we'll dig even deeper into the understanding of this miracle that we call the human body and take advantage of what we're learning here at the Gray Institute podcast.
You have been listening to the Gray Institute podcast. For more information, please visit us at www.grayinstitute.com.
Move your body, move your body.